Okay. Hello, everyone. So I'll let you keep getting to that poll, but I want to introduce myself. I'm Gabriel Kelvin, and I'm here with my colleagues Sorrel and Yvonne, and we're here to go through some of the innovative research designs we uncovered doing the Inland Empire and Desert Student Voices project, and how that can really give us some amazing insights and clarity and ability to capture the student voice in a very strong and tangible way. So next slide. So kind of getting into this, what exactly this research design, what exactly we're doing this for. This isn't just for scientists, this is for all the institutions we work with and everyone in every position. And the model we really used and some of the results we found and how the Student Voices project is different is that it's really research for results. We use student-led methods that get straight to the issues rather than talking about what we believe is kind of our best guess as to what is some of the barriers we're facing in our institutions, especially going up into COVID and especially going up into other institutional challenges that have been faced with us recently. We're able to kind of allow students that space and that ability to to propose their own solutions, their own issues, their own experience. And that quantitative element to that qualitative element really gives us the ability to look into the analytics behind this, what parts of systemic issues and what parts of different parts of research are affecting these issues, what different parts of demographics, what different parts of social barriers are affecting these, and gives us the ability to empower these stories. And furthermore, it really allows us to provide more representative and more usable data as far as addressing different barriers in our institutions. So I really want to say the difference in approach here, we all have focus groups, we all have surveys, we all have different methodologies we use at our institutions. And what is the difference? What is really unique about Inland Empire Desert Student Voices? And it's phenomenal. We have, instead of traditional focus groups, have the participants on campus for one day, usually about 5 minutes of data per student. Only those who are able to attend in person are able to be a part of this. And we also kind of very much have a lot of control over the discussion, and groupthink is very much present in these. Whereas within Inland Empire Desert Student Voices, we're allowed to have people log onto an online platform called qualboard, and they're able to participate anytime during that day for 1 hour for 3 days. That gives us 180 minutes of data per student. That's, compared to 5 minutes, that's massively more. And also allows us to be much more flexible in who we participate. We're able to use targeted recruitment, and also we're able to kind of really get more open-ended data. And this is very confidential, and this is very reflective of the student experience. Next slide, please. So with this, the difference is also shown in the results. We were extremely diverse in our sample. As the slide says, we had 47% below living wage, 29% Black and African American, and also 26% Hispanic. And also these problems they identified came with their own solutions. There's no easier way than to say there is a barrier at an institution. What do you believe would be a good solution? What would help you? What would make your experience better at this institution and allow you to reach the goals that you've set out for yourself? And also these results further inform our quantitative and survey exploration. From the small group of students, we can pair out and get some of the underlying problems we've looked at, and then use quantitative survey methodology to really expand our understanding of these issues. And so kind of just the whole part of the project is step one was the qualitative element, which is what we just kind of described. And we're going to go over much more in depth as far as how you can use that at your own institution and the benefits of doing so. Our next step will be to use a quantitative element or kind of a survey component that will be able to expand and explore deeper on these, especially across the whole region. And also step three would be Student Voices 2. I'm not going to steal Sorrel's thunder much on that because she'll get into that a little bit later, but that's exciting stuff coming in a few slides. And I just want to kind of give some background to this project, who we are, who's presenting this stuff. Well, this is really, I believe this is a textbook example, a dictionary example of cross-sectional. This started out with students. I'm a student. I'm currently at UC Berkeley, as formerly at Victor Valley College. And I was able to propose this project along with another student senator at the time. It was therefore picked up and championed by Angelica Ibarra, who I'm sure we all know, and is a very, very remarkable individual in Guided Pathways and the CCC Foundation. And then it was also very generously sponsored and very generously empowered by GIA. and the growing inland achievement, and also was therefore scientifically supported by Yvonne Olivares. So we have the entire cross-section of the community college experience in one group here, and that's really how we started. And I'm going to give it over to Sorrel as she goes into, Yvonne, as she goes into our methodology and exactly what you can expect with these methodologies.
Thanks, Gabriel. All right, so we've talked a lot about, what the study is, and what the best way to really talk about the study is, and what it is, what it can do, and how useful it is to go through and talk about some examples of the things we learned. Student voice, what it was an experience study. And Gabriel really, helps break down sort of how is that different, traditional versus non, versus what we did. But the best way I can think to actually explain this is that experience studies, in this case, it's about understanding not just the student's problem on one topic, but really understanding the entire ecosystem. And the analogy I have for that is traditional research, they go, okay, well, you know what, we want to understand this insect. And they bring an insect into lab, they, measure it, look at the colors, look at the shape, look at how it moves. Maybe they decide they want to understand it better, dissect it, that's their version of qual-quant. And that's all well and good. You're learning a lot about the bug. And the way this is different is that instead of trying to understand the bug, the way that we believe and understand it in our lab is we're actually going out into the jungle or the desert or wherever it is that insect lives and going, okay, so how does this bug interact within the system? What food is it eating? What are things, how is it building its nest? How, mating habits? And it's all about understanding all those sort of interactions that are happening and how that all works together to make the bug's life better or worse. All right. And when I talk about wide array, just to give you a sense, Gabe mentioned about 180 minutes of data. It was on a lot of different topics because what we were doing was just trying to understand sort of the landscape of the students. So this isn't actually even an all-inclusive list of the topics we explored with students, but just to give you a sense, everything from how students chose their current college, what are the barriers and support systems for them, both within the college and outside of it, how did they choose their major or their career, how's it been actually once they chose that major or their career path and, trying to progress through their experiences in the classroom, experiences with student services or getting resources on campus, issues of inclusion, and for students who transfer between community colleges, what's going on and why. And all of the above, students discussed not just what was happening in their lives, but how, if there were things that weren't working well, how they would improve it and why. Now, just to give you an example, I'm someone who I like concrete. One thing we learned in our study was that Black African-American students are more likely to report feeling isolated or left out on campus. We have students who said, I don't feel a sense of belonging because I don't have many people to relate to. And I know what many of you are thinking. You're going, well, you know what? I get that. Our African-American students on campus, they're a small group. And I probably would have said, oh, yes, they are a small group. But what we did was look at what's another similarly small group, which is our Asian American students in the Inland Empire. And what we found that they actually had the exact opposite. They had a high sense of belonging on campus. So exploring further and looking at Black and African-American student experience to see how they were describing their interactions, and we were seeing very common themes. One, they don't have regular campus groups or activities. A student here was saying, I haven't been really active with activities at my school. I eventually want to be more active. This would be okay if we were talking about a new student, but this student had been at her college more than 3 years. Students who do talk about having a sense of belonging, they get this sense of belonging from external groups from the colleges. Student told us, I'm part of a Black community where we get together once in a while to check in on each other, and that makes me feel part of something big. I'm also in a local basketball team. Now, there are occasions when students feel like they belong or they feel welcome, and unfortunately, though, these are often limited to annual events or special events that are very obviously advertised to be an all-campus event. Students talked about college trips. They talked about, another student mentioned, I felt included in last year's music and drama festival, which is good. I mean, it's a step in the right direction, but it's, a far cry from where we'd like them to be. Now, along with all these things, we asked students like what would actually make them feel like they belong on their campus. And the solution they came up with, it was pretty simple. African American students, they recommend that their colleges have spotlights on fellow Black and African American students and their accomplishments. When we asked, what is it about these spotlights? It's when they're sitting alone in the classroom, or in, if they're at home doing a Zoom, and they're feeling isolated, they're feeling alone, having these spotlights reminds them that they may be alone in that classroom, but they're not alone on the campus. And more importantly, there's other people who are where they are and they're succeeding. And so it also serves as reinforcement that they could also accomplish that. Now, as we were going through, we didn't have any theories we were testing. This was really just, like I said, we were going to explore the insect, want to understand the ecosystem. One thing we found interesting, we found lots of differences based on race, gender, some socioeconomics. But something we kept seeing really common throughout was that students tended to agree on the solutions. The difference was, though, on why they needed any particular solutions were really based on urgency. Like, how big of an impact would it make? Was it they agree that this is important because it'll make things easier, or agree this will be important because without it, right now, they've got just a solid barrier to their success. And the best way to exemplify this is when we talk to students, very high level, tell us about the, support systems at your college and helping you, choose your major. What we heard were from white and Caucasian students was that they were very aware of the support networks at their college. We've got one student here who said, my college is very supportive when it comes to helping us be successful. The counseling department creates education plans for students to keep them on track to graduate. The Veteran Resource Center is there to support veterans with things they need. The DRC makes sure students with disabilities get the resources they need in their education goals. And faculty members will make sure students understand the materials being taught. And this was regardless of living wage status, if students were above or below that living wage. Unfortunately, this was a stark contrast to what we were hearing for students of color. Initially, I didn't know what to major in, and I decided to go with the liberal arts because my advisor suggested I pick something more broad since I didn't have an idea of major that I really wanted to do. I talked to friends and family, as well as my counselor at school, and a lot of people also did liberal arts because they weren't sure what to do. I wish that I would have had a little more guidance, or I would have been able to foreshadow in order to select a major instead of just picking something broad, because I feel like I'm in limbo and I still don't really know. I think that other college students were helpful in guiding me and giving me advice, but I definitely think my advisor and my counselor have been super busy, so I haven't been as helpful. I wish that there had been independent digital tools that I could have used that would facilitate it and that would have given me an insight as to what these careers actually look like, and I wish the college would have facilitated that. Now, I know like you, I think many of you probably hear this quote, and unfortunately, this was not unique to any one college. This was across the board for the Inland Empire Desert. There's a lot to unpack here, but we're going to focus instead on what the students' solutions were, which were some students, they need more detailed guidance on how to access additional resources. We could sit there and talk about a lot of things with that because, like I said, when you're looking at the ecosystem, students may be talking about one thing, but those of us who are looking at them go, students are unknowingly identifying other problems. But this issue of the additional resources, students will, talk about very positive interactions with their counselors. I mean, students, the most common phrases students use with counseling services were the terms like caring, but there was a difference between racially on how much actionable insight counselors gave. Here we have a student talking about a counseling interaction. I tried looking up what classes I was supposed to take online, but I never actually found an answer. It was pretty common for our Latinx and African American students to talk about counselors will say stuff and it sort of makes sense, but they can't find the things the counselors are looking for. Students who mentioned they'd been in school 2, 3, 4 years before they figured out how to access major requirements sheets, only to learn that most of the courses they were taking didn't actually apply to their degrees. All right, so what was consistent across all the populations, didn't matter race, gender, ethnicity, was that students kept talking about that there's these limited and inconsistent modes of communications that are reinforcing knowledge gaps for them. And they talked about it at different phases throughout the course, from choosing the major, picking the right courses, reaching out to get additional support or resources. And students had a lot of recommendations around how to solve this. And first and foremost is that they don't just want, but they absolutely need multimode communication. Now, multimode communication can vary somewhat depending on, are they reaching out to get information versus if the college is trying to send them information. When students are actually trying to seek information for themselves, they really focus on how user and mobile friendly is the website. Is that information regularly updated? There's nothing worse to our students than spending time trying to find information only to finally find what they think is the place that they were supposed to be looking for, and the information is out of date. Students, their wish list included this all-inclusive calendar. Their dream of having a calendar that's got links to the deadlines and the events and the workshops. Students would also love to have some sort of help desk, and the definition of the desk can vary from being a call line, chat line, whatever colleges can do, but some way to ask and go, what department is it I'm supposed to be reaching out to if I need help with this? Because students don't know where to even go to ask for support. And along that vein is, once they are reaching out to student services, having multi-mode communication plans. And when I use student services, I'm using it the way students did, which is basically any service that's being provided to students. So it doesn't include just counseling and disability, EOPS. This also includes things like library services and financial aid and tutoring. I'll talk more a little bit about the student service in a few minutes, but okay. So let's talk about when students are receiving information. So the college is sending out information. And again, this is, what students wish they had. If the college really would like to keep students informed, they would have a website that students could rely on, that the website changes information. Students could rely on that as a way to get that info. That all-inclusive calendar, if you had that on your website or through whatever your college app is that had the links, again, that would be a way that students would love to be able to receive information. If there's any new or different, something urgent, having a weekly email that goes out that says, hey, we've got this coming up this week. They would also like to have notifications. And these notifications can come via college app, they can come through Canvas, whatever it is, and when we ask students, notifications, there's a lot of things that are happening on campus, how many are too many? There's no such thing. Students want notifications. So why do we keep talking about these sort of mobile friendly? Now the user friendly, that's pretty easy to explain. Our students They need to be able to navigate the site without having to have specialized knowledge and expertise in data mining to be able to go through it. But the mobile friendliness is a different animal altogether. One thing we learned during this study was that we have many students who don't own their own laptop. They are sharing a laptop with family members, or they're using library loaner laptops. And even our students who have their own laptops rely heavily on their mobile devices. The office hours that the college is open conflict with their work hours. And many of our students are working in warehouses and grocery stores. And these are not places where students are going to take their laptop to. I mean, students are saving money to buy the tools they need to get an education. And they may have used, weeks or even months of, their funds to buy a laptop. They're not going to stick it in their tiny little locker at work and hope that it doesn't get stolen. So anytime we're doing any sort of online apps, online portals, or any sort of website, we have to always make sure that it's mobile friendly, because when we don't, all we're doing is reinforcing existing inequities. All right, so I promised I'd get back to that student service communication. So the student services, students really, this was something they really spent a lot of time on, was that they really need student services to be available in more than one way. Why? Well, our students don't always have reliable internet. They don't always have functioning cameras, or they're not always in places where a camera is appropriate, because like I said, sometimes they're calling from work. They're calling from places that it's just inappropriate to be doing so. And then of course they have really conflicting demands. They've got jobs, they've got families. And so their multi-mode sort of wish list for student services, and they're aware that they can't get all of these, so they wish the colleges would do all of them. But first is video chat with file sharing. There's some colleges that at the beginning of the pandemic were using things like FaceTime, and students really appreciated that colleges were making the effort of trying to find different ways to connect. But apps that do video without the file sharing, students don't see the point, since the whole point of reaching out to student services is that they're looking for information. And so they want to be able to have a file sent to them, or to have a website, link given to them, whatever it is. Second is a call-in option. As I mentioned, don't always have that reliable internet, so being able to call in is really helpful. Students would also like to be able to email simple questions. Sometimes it's not necessary that they, speak to someone, and they just really need to know what's the deadline for this, or, what's this particular form I need to do. And so being able to email simple questions would be really helpful, even if it is something that seems simple to a student and the reply is, this is a more complicated response, we need you to schedule an appointment. Students also wish there was some sort of instant messaging or chat ability. And lastly, and this one's actually vital, is that students want tutorials for accessing every mode of communication. So no matter which modes your college has, students need to know how to access it. And our students tell us, college need to have very clear instructions for as many things as possible, with pictures, maybe a text voice helpline, and the people working them reminded. Some people can be very oblivious to certain things and ask really dumb, easy to figure out questions. The key here is that students want as much communication clearly delineated, and there is no such thing as over communication for our students. Now, a lot of this study focused on looking at how students got to their majors. One thing we learned was that many of our students are relying on their past to choose their major. They took a class in high school, or they took a gen ed course. They were exposed to the field through their family. We've got a student who said, I've always known I wanted to work in the medical field since I was young. I have many family members and family friends that are nurses. Other students talked about, the exposure to, child services, making them want to go into social work. And all these things are, well and good. Some students were lucky. For them, the world was a little bit bigger in that they had, an older sibling or cousin, who made a recommendation. This is all well and good if you've got students who are coming from middle-class backgrounds because their worlds are bigger. They get a lot more exposure in the types of courses that are available to them, the types of careers they would have been exposed to. But for students who are working class and working poor, we've already narrowed the gap of information for them. Students, unfortunately, they don't research, they don't know how. The students who do research, they rely on Google. They're not going to the colleges. We had students say, they Google search their entire career. Another student, I Googled articles to understand the requirements and daily life of a tech. It would have been great if schools could provided this information. It goes above and beyond to give insights into the daily life of a job because it may sound great at first, but may not be what you expect. I wish there were just more resources from the school instead of me having to do my own research. Even if they provided links, it was more helpful than me having to find my own resources. And this is a really common theme. Students don't expect the colleges to provide everything, but at least more direction than what they're getting. And there are some colleges who are doing actually really well in having this information. But again, they're being hindered by that not usable website. The students don't know how to get to that information. And as I said, students shouldn't have to spend 5 or 6 hours to find information because our students don't. They don't have that kind of time. There's a lot of solutions students proposed to this, but I'm gonna just mention one, which is an easy takeaway, was that students think that career assessments should be encouraged, even for students who think they know. Students, got a quote here, college should have offered an assessment that helps place undecided majors into suggested career paths. That would be nice. I used to be a fire science major, and in taking the required EMT course conveniently, I learned that I enjoy medicine more. I would also implement a required assessment as part of orientation and entering the college, even if a student has a good idea of what they want to do. After the assessment, I'd like to host quarterly career fairs on campus in the plaza. I would want to expand their view of what jobs are available. Now, I know I've thrown a lot of information at you, and these were, but I really want to sort of reinforce that that was a tip of the iceberg of information that we learned, because again, we were looking at the entire sort of symbiosis of their environment. And that's an example of an experience study model that was used for student voices. And Sorrel will talk next about sort of next steps. But ideally, this type of method in going after representative sampling, making it to where that representative sample, make it easy for them to participate, make it easy for them to share and decide what are the things that matter, and let them do the identification, can be used in different ways. Ideally, this method is really for anything that's innovation or problem solving. One way that I've used this actually in the past for studies is for journey mapping. Journey mapping, if you're not familiar, is a step-by-step process of decision-making, triggers, obstacles, and how that could play is, let's say we wanted to explore deeper into the actual, choosing of a major and how students stay on the path to complete that major or that career path. So we would be exploring not just the decision-making process, but what triggers that, what triggers them falling off the path, identifying the obstacles. Also, what are the things that when they fall off are the things that help bring them back? So that way we can figure out what are the things that colleges could implement, knowing that there's going to be things that get students, to veer away or to put pressure on them, to be able to integrate them back into it and successfully get them sort of to their finish line at a more reasonable speed. Another way that I've used this method in the past are with perception studies. Perception studies, basically, it's about, usually it's negative perceptions, but exploring perceptions and identifying what are the tipping points that trigger positive change. And thinking about sort of what we learned in Student Voices 1, I was thinking about sort of there's quite a lot of perceptions around who is or isn't welcomed at different campus events. And I assume that no college is intentionally trying to alienate or keep some students out. And so it could be a possibility of going, okay, so what is it that colleges are inadvertently doing that does this, and what are the things that could be done to change it, As you saw with sort of the examples that I gave here, most of the recommendations that you find in these sort of in this sort of methodology, usually most of them are really simple. Most of them are actually sort of no or low cost solutions. And that's because people don't, most of us who are in the research, if you went to us and said, here's this problem, and we would all try to think of very complicated things, but for the people who are actually living them, they're 9 out of 10, the big solutions tend to be small. And so that's, to me, one of the nice things about this is that anytime I use this methodology, it really is about creating things that are easier to do. All right. So I'm going to hand it over to Sorrel.
Thanks, Yvonne. So as you've all heard, the results of this Student Voices study provided us with a lot of insight into key aspects of the student experience and also the relative urgency of different issues. But it also left us wondering if we could go deeper and learn more about and from our students to help them succeed, and especially in the aftermath of COVID. So of the topics related to barriers and supports experienced by students that were covered in the first study that Yvonne and Gabriel described, we want to determine which themes to prioritize in the second phase for further and deeper exploration, and how these issues are really impacting students and colleges. We also want to learn whether there is anything that we may have inadvertently missed that would be important to include. So when we break out into the discussion groups, we'd love to use your experience, wisdom, and insights as leaders and practitioners in the IE to help us refine the next phase of the Student Voices project, because it's really imperative that we're asking questions that will be useful to the colleges as they meet the needs of all our students, and your contributions can really help us do this. In terms of actual next steps, we'll be partnering with 6 local IE institutions and doing the deep qualboard research that Yvonne was describing earlier, with 25 to 30 students at each college. And this time we'll also be including a university, which we're excited about. Once we have the results, the overall results, the findings for the region as a whole, and the college-specific findings will be shared with each partner college, along with associated recommendations. And unlike the first study that we were sharing today, built into this second expanded stage of the project will be a commitment with the partner colleges to implement changes that are grounded in the findings that emerge. So based on the previous work, we expect that many of the findings, the student-derived recommendations, will actually be fairly simple to implement. Many of them so far have been either no or low cost for the colleges. But participating colleges will agree ahead of time to convene, relevant leadership to discuss how to address any higher cost recommendations if they emerge from the research. And then GIA, of course, will be here to try to offer assistance and resources if needed, if there are findings that won't be, low or no cost to implement. So Next slide, please. Okay, so before we go into the smaller groups to discuss themes and issues for the next phase of Student Voices in more depth, we just wanted to remind you of the themes that we used in the first phase. These were things we asked students about that triggered all of the findings that Yvonne described. And Yvonne, in the chat, I got a couple people asking questions about, to just describe a little more about what the qualboard was like, you know, because these findings are so rich, but how did we get them? Would you mind just describing that for a little bit more?
Sure. Well, thinking sort of big picture, the qualboard, the tool itself, really great. But when I talk about this, this type of study is actually helpful for two reasons. One, in how we sample, which is about that representative sampling and making sure to include everyone. And the second part is that qualboard. So qualboard is actually just a tool. The reason I use it, there's others out there, you know, similar, but the reason I chose that one is because it works like an online messaging board, except for you're able to control who sees what activities when. And so, for example, students will get, the board will open up at 6 a.m., say on a Tuesday. And students, anytime during the day after it opens, can log in and do the different questions. And, you know, as Gabriel mentioned, it's about an hour worth of activities a day, but students don't have to do it for an hour. You know, students are told they can log in and out as much as they want. They could go in and do it in 15-minute intervals. They can do it all in one sitting. They can do it at 11:59 p.m. We don't care, whenever it's convenient for them. And the tool actually, what's really nice about it is that students don't actually have to download anything. A lot of the sort of latest tech relies on people being able to download things onto their phones or their computers, which is all well and good when you own your own computer or when you've got the latest tech that'll support these things. But the qualboard doesn't actually require them to download anything, which means that students who are using, you know, computers that are 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, not a problem. Students who, you know, don't have their own computer, they're using a library loaner top. If they have to rely on their mobile phones, that's okay because nothing is being downloaded. Students actually even have the ability to text their responses in if they'd like. Another little part of that is that students are able to then, they can reply however they choose. Some students are really good at the written word, and that's really great. Some students, that's not their strength. They can actually upload a video, describe what's going on, or they can put in images to help explain or do screen captures. So yeah, the qualboard, when you're thinking about sort of what is it I would like to explore at my college, because really this is, I mean, Sorrel talked about 6 colleges, but my hope is to give you some understanding of what research could look like going forward. This is something I've been doing in the private sector for more than a decade. And, you know, this is something I'd like education sector to be doing as a way of evening the playing field. So did that answer the question? Did I say more than what you were hoping? I'm sorry.
No, that's wonderful. Yeah, just so that people have a sense for how they might try this at their institutions. Okay, I think so. Now we're going to go into our breakout rooms for 10 minutes, and again, just brainstorming about some of the areas we've already covered. You know, whether to go deeper or if there's areas that we have overlooked that are important. So Ryan, if you could stick us in our groups, that would be awesome.
Well, we had a really awesome discussion in our breakout room as well.
We only have 4 minutes. Gabriel, do you want to share out?
Yeah, really briefly, on our Jamboard, ours was based on student success and student completion, and we had a lot of just information that came up on all 3 of us, was lack of clarity on students sometimes on what transfers, what applies, issues on understanding, you know, what is necessary for their career path. Those are really kind of the 3 ones that came up, was regarding how can they prepare for their degree and when do they know to graduate. We had a whole discussion on grad checks and how, you know, incredibly useful those are. And we think that'd be a really rich, robust, you know, research area is, when do students know it's time to move on? When do they think it's time to move on? Why don't they know when it's time to move on? So we thought that was a really lucrative area to look into.
Great. Anybody else want to share out some of the conversation in their group? Yvonne, how about your group? Oh, you're muted.
It always takes me a moment. Well, our group, we had actually quite a good discussion. One on having those sort of in leadership at the top and in the colleges, needing time with actual students. You know, they're not really understanding their struggles and needing some realistic sort of knocks to the head on what students are actually struggling with. And another point being diversification of faculty and leadership, how to utilize data better to help make more informed decisions about the institutional barriers that exist. And we actually spent quite a bit of time looking at sort of the systems and structures in place when faculty or staff are seeing things that are happening, or students share things with them that are happening, and then being able to, you know, share that information confidentially. You know, there's students who will make valid complaints and nothing happens at the time. There's no change occurring. And so our group basically said there's just so many things under the institutional racism, classism, and institutional barriers. But yeah, so very, very tip of the iceberg for the group.
Well, I know we're almost to the end of the session and people might have a question or two, but I do want to report just super briefly from our group. And we were focusing, after some technical difficulties, on student experience and engagement. And I think to sum it up, I would say from what we got to, there are so many ways of trying to get students engaged, trying to really help with that. And it would be helpful to know which ones are really successful, especially given that some could be burdensome on students, but maybe worth it. Others not. Others, like, you know, robust first year experience programs, you know, heavy lift for the colleges. Is it really doing what it can for engagement or for students, or would there be other ways to accomplish that? In the last minute, does anyone have a burning question for us about this project or the Student Voices 2, the next stage?
Could you tell us again how we can access anything written up about this?
Oh, I'm so glad you said that. Yes, we have a link for that, actually, so you can get more information. Thanks, Beth.
Okay.
Are you guys able to see?
I put in the chat a link so you could sign up, and we can send out when we're finished with the final report.
Great.
Okay, are you guys not able to see the screen sharing? It should be on there, but.
Yeah, we can. And also there's a clickable version in the chat.
Perfect.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Reach out to any of us if you have more questions.
Yeah, and if you have thoughts, like you have ideas on things we need to be focused on, please feel free, email me, email Sorrel, Gabe, let us know what are the things that matter to you all. So.
Thank you. Wonderful. Fascinating.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.